Welcome viewers. Today we are going to attend a class related to listening skills. What is the chapter outline of today's class? What is listening? Process of listening, difference between hearing and listening, benefits of effective listening, barriers to effective listening. What is listening? Listening is a skill of critical significance in all aspects of our lives, from maintaining our personal relationships, to getting our jobs done, to taking notes in class, to figuring it out with bus to take to the airport. English is a skill subject. Here we are getting different kinds of skills. We are having listening, speaking, reading, writing. Listening and reading, we receive information. We call these skills as receptive skills. Through speaking and writing, we express our views, our feelings, our emotions. We are using our expressive skills. So here a question comes. As a teacher, we take the class, we instruct the students about how to write assignments. Here the students should listen to the instruction of the teacher, how they are going to prepare the assignments. So they need to be very aware about the instructions. So to be aware of the instructions, I need to be very alert. So in one precise sentence, how can we define listening? Listening means to take in what is being said and organizing it sensibly for understanding. Now hearing and listening. Whenever we come across hearing versus listening, what is the basic difference? So let us have a quick view about the differences between hearing and listening. Hearing means an ability to perceive the sounds that we are going to receive the vibrations through the ears. Now when we come to listening skills, what does it come to me? Number one, listening means a conscious effort to analyze and understand. At the same time, I need to interpret what I hear. Second, hearing is an ability, listening is a skill. Third point of difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is a passive process and listening is an active process. Because when we come across hearing and listening, hearing means what? We are hearing through our ears, and listening means I am listening with my mind. So here we are getting the involvement of our sense organs. When we are talking about hearing, hearing means about ears. Only one sense organ has been involved. But when we are discussing about listening, it comprises of my eyes, ears, even also as a teacher also we need to deliver so many things to our students, where our students has to touch the material also. So eyes, ears and touch, that means my involvement of the sense organs are required. Hearing is unconscious effort, listening is a conscious effort. Hearing is involuntary and listening is voluntary. Hearing is a physiological act, listening is a psychological act. If I am not interested in the topic, will I listen? I won't listen, because these are not my areas of interest. When topic or my content is not my areas of interest, I may not listen. I may not find it much more interesting. For example, I may say, are you listening to me? In case of listening, this an example I can give to my student. If I am talking about hearing, what kind of example can I give? I have heard this song long before. I have heard this noise. So in a summarization, we can say the difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is a physiological activity and listening is a psychological activity. Hearing is a passive process because physical activity, physical processes are being involved, and listening means it's an active and mental process. The psychological acts are taking into place. Now, what are the process of listening? Because in the previous slide, I told you about listening, but listening involves lot of stages. Total 5 stages are there. We are having receiving, understanding, remembering, evaluating, responding. Receiving. Here the intentional focus on hearing a speaker's message. At present, who is the speaker? Being a teacher, I am the speaker. Who are my listeners? My students are my listeners. This stage is represented by the ear because it is the primary tool involved with this stage of the listening process. In some books, in some study materials, in some references also, you will get hearing, because receiving stage involves both hearing and attending. So what do you mean by hearing? It's a process where the listener registers the sound waves immediately as it hits the sensory receptors of the ear. Secondly, we are getting another involvement of attending. This process involves interpreting the sound accurately and carefully as we hear the words to give them their meaning in the context. So, we have got 2 important things over here, hearing and attending. Now we are coming across the second stage, that is understanding. This is the stage at which we learn what the speaker wants to say in terms of his thoughts or feelings, and also helps to understand both verbal and non-verbal symbols we have seen and heard. Here students, I want to go to the previous slide. Just to notice, we have mentioned 2 important stages, hearing and attending. Why am I giving lots of preference to hearing and attending? See, whenever we are talking about receiving, for example, whenever the speaker speaks in the class, the students are going to listen to the important things. Here the brain selects the stimuli and permits only selective words. Why am I selecting those words? Because I think those things are relevant. Those things are very important for my student to listen. Students will pick out those words, but those things will be done by our brain. Brain will select the stimuli and the selective words will come into my focus because those words are very important and very relevant. When am I coming to the second stage, that is understanding stage? What are we focusing on? Here we are talking about selecting the stimuli which we perceived. That these things have to be understood and these things are much more important and relevant. Now remembering, it is not that only receiving and interpreting the messages. I even need to store it in my mind's storage bank. This role will be performed by the memory. We are getting 2 types of memory, short-term memory and the long-term memory. Short-term memory is very instant. Within a fraction of second and minutes, I can recollect the facts and issues that has been discussed by my teacher in the class. Secondly, I am talking about long-term memory. Long-term memory, it has to be retained, and I can bring it back within days, weeks, or even years. Now the fourth stage, evaluation stage. Why the fourth stage is very relevant? Because here I have to perform the role of an active listener. I need to judge the value of the message. For example, here the active listener, he will go with the pros and cons of the message. Here the listener will try to separate the facts from the opinions. I need to understand about two things: about the presence or absence of bias or prejudices in one's message. Now the last stage, that is responding. In some books you will notice responding has been referred to as feedback. This is actually the final stage of the listening process. My reaction to the message, it can be emotional and intellectual. This stage is represented by the lips if I give a verbal feedback. However, it can be non-verbal also. How can I give non-verbal feedbacks? By nodding the head, by smiling, by my gesture, by my expressions, I can give non-verbal feedback. We have discussed about the 5 stages. Now if I give you one example about the 5 stages, how will you explain it? For example, whenever our parents go to office, before going to office, they used to instruct us, don't do it. Once I say this sentence to my child, how can I interpret the 5 stages of listening? First, when I said, don't do it, what happened? I received the message given by my parents. Second, I understood that what have I been instructed by my parents. Third, I remembered that I should not do it. Here I need to be very active in judging about the value of my message. Do it means what? It is IT it, not EAT it. I need to be very evaluative, that this is a wrong behavior, this is wrong, I should not repeat it. But I need to give a response to my parents. How? Either by nodding my head, that comes under non-verbal feedback, or I can give a response, I won't do such kind of things in my life. So these are the 5 stages of listening process. Now benefits of effective listening. Say listening is one of the highest compliments a human being can pay respect to another human being. Listening increases accuracy. Listening definitely increases accuracy. Better listening habits will help me to correct facts, issues, and it will help me to reduce miscommunications and mistakes. Because students, we come across different kinds of listeners. Some are good listeners, some are bad listeners, some are impulsive listeners, some are impatient listeners, and many more. Second benefit which we get by listening effectively, it increases confidence. For example, the teacher, when he teaches in the class, teacher listens very patiently from his or her students. At the same time, automatically, I shall have a better self-esteem and self-image also. It will automatically help me also to be very cozy with my students. I can easily get along with my students, because in this world it has been seen that people are very interested to speak. They speak more, but they listen less. So many researches has been done. It has been found the 75% of people communicate while awake. What are the different steps? Listening, speaking, reading, writing. Listening, 45% we practice in listening. Rest 30% we practice in speaking. Rest 16% we practice in reading. Rest 9% we practice in writing. This skill has been the poorest one. It has been ignored so far. That's why we have been suffering a lot in our personal life and professional life. Because listening increases confidence, at the same time it increases the accuracy and self-efficacy of a person. Third, listening can bring harmonic climate. Yes, once we are listening or we are focusing on a listening, both the speaker and the listener can remain calm and cool while discussing about an emotional matter or about a crisis. If I listen more, I can have a tendency to find a proper solution. It will bring harmony in our life, because we are very keen to argue with people, but we haven't listened what the person intends to communicate. Number 4, listening helps in enhancing productivity. Definitely, because productivity will be higher. People will be focusing on solving problems, not in finding problems. We will be very keen to give a proper solution instead of advice giving sessions. It will definitely increase my productivity. I need to listen to the instructions given by my teacher. Listening minimizes the loss of potential revenues. Yes, if I practice good listening habit, I can reach my goal. Even what I can do, what happens, it will increase the work environment. If my work environment is very effective, what will happen? It will increase the quality of services, and that services will attract the loyalty of the customer. But here, who are my stakeholders? My students. I need to listen to their problems so that I can avoid wastage of human resource also. Listening prevents miscommunication of objectives and priorities among people. If I listen more, I can reach the desired objectives stated by my organization or by institution. I can set my priorities. Whom to listen first? If you join a particular institution as an administrator, you need to listen to the problems of your employees. It may be your teaching staff, it can be your non-teaching staff. You need to listen to them so that I can reach the objectives of my institution. Listening also prevents loss of time, because if I listen properly, I can prepare or I can get a direction about my decision or about my next move. Now we are coming to barriers to effective listening. What do you mean by barriers? Barriers means hindrances, obstacles that stands in one's way. What is the number one barrier to effective listening? First one is the physical barrier. Physical barrier means my environmental barrier. For example, the teacher is taking a class. Suddenly, you can hear about noises of automobiles, of motorbikes, your mobile phones are ringing, beep sound of your mobile phone as if a message has come. Distractions can be from the environment also. For example, poor lighting, you are unable to listen just because of noise. These are the physical barriers. Next, we are having the physiological barriers. Yes. For example, we have discussed about the environmental barriers. How come physiological barriers can stand as a hindrance to my effective listening? If I am suffering from high fever or I am having a bodily discomfort, so I may not find the lecture delivered by teacher interesting because my body is not giving me a sign to attend the class. I may want to skip the class and go back to home and take rest. Physiological barriers. Next, we are having the psychological barriers. Definitely, if a person is suffering from anxiety, tension, mental blockage, that I don't want to listen, this topic is not relevant, I don't find it that much interesting, I am suffering from different kinds of anxiety related to my family issues, regarding my health issues also, because if my health is also not going well, automatically, mentally also I shall become not that much sound to attend the today's session also. So these are my psychological barriers. Next, we are having the language barriers, which we call the linguistic barriers. For example, different kinds of jargons, technical words, illogical words, the contextual meaning of those words may create another barrier for the listener. Next, we are having the non-verbal communication. What do we mean by non-verbal communication? Non-verbal communication means communication with the help of gesture, posture, facial expression, eye contact. For example, when a listener is giving a presentation, if the person is not giving a proper facial expression, no smile, there is no inflection in his or her tone, those who are listeners, they may not find it that much interesting. It may sound monotonous and boring. Next, we are having the content. Yes, content of the speech is also very important. For example, the knowledge of the subject is so extensive that the listeners are not getting that much of interest. It can happen the other way also. If my knowledge toward the subject is also very poor, I may not find that much interesting to listen to that lecture. So content also matters. Next, we are having the speaker. Now you will ask, why speaker? How speaker can stand as a barrier to effective listening? Yes, speaker's tone, volume, appearance, all creates an impact on the listeners. Listeners may find it that not appealing to listen to that lecture. So automatically it will stand as another barrier to effective listening. So in our today's session, we have covered about what is listening. Next, we have discussed about the steps also, that is called the stages. We have discussed about the benefits also, about effective listening and the barriers to effective listening. So before we conclude, let us have a quick recap. So what is listening? Listening means what has been said and how it has been interpreted, that is receiving, understanding, then What next? I have received the information, I understood, I need to evaluate, I need to give a proper response. So how we are going to conclude that 5 stages? Receiving, understanding, then remembering, then evaluating, then responding. Now you will say that why listening is very important? Because if I listen properly, I can understand what has been taught, what has been discussed, how can I improve myself, because we need to know about good listeners, what are the good listening habits. Even we should know how to overcome the bad listening habits. At the end, how we can say that effective listening stands as a support to our classroom lectures, because listening helps to identify the important facts and events discussed in the class. I can have a proper communication rapport with my students, because as a teacher it's not enough to teach. I need to understand how far they have assimilated, how far they have understood, and how far they will be in a position to reproduce that knowledge that they have gathered in a class. But in the process, we need to overcome also the different barriers to effective listening. What are those barriers? These physical barriers. Physical barriers is very difficult to overcome because that is not in my hand. Physiological barriers, if my health doesn't support, how can I listen to the teacher's lecture? Third, if I am mentally disturbed, how can I be an effective listener? Fourth, just because of language, it stands as another barrier for the speaker to reach to the listeners, because I should try to refrain from using jargons, technical terms. At the same time, we must remember communication are of different types. It is both verbal and non-verbal. Here one question comes, what do you mean by verbal communication? Verbal communication means communication orally and written. Non-verbal communication means when we are communicating with the help of our actions, that is gesture, posture, facial expression, eye contact. But what we are communicating to our listener, that is also very important, content. We should be very careful about the selection of the content. And that means I must know about my target groups for whom I am going to deliver the lecture or the today's session. Being a speaker, I must know how to modulate my voice, my tone, my pitch, my appearance, because whenever we are communicating verbally, we are also communicating non-verbally. That is, actions speak louder than words. So I must use appropriate non-verbal communication also in the classroom. That all from my side. So thanks to all for listening to my today's session.